In a grand hall filled with centuries of tradition, two Oxford champions made a fatal mistake. They laughed at their opponent's accent and walked straight into a trap they never saw coming. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments, and I will give you a heart. The hall falls silent. The motion has been announced. This house believes that former colonial powers should pay reparations to their former colonies. The weight of the words hangs in the air like a storm cloud. You can feel the tension crackle, students shifting in their seats, professors leaning forward, judges scribbling notes before a single word has been spoken. On the government side, Jonathan Whitmore rises. He's tall, polished, the kind of man who looks like he was born in a blazer. His posture screams confidence. His baritone voice cuts through the silence with practiced ease. He doesn't just sound like he belongs in this hall, he sounds like he owns it. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, Jonathan begins, his smile calm, magnanimous, almost rehearsed. The motion before us today is one that certainly tugs at the heartstrings. It speaks to a history of pain and injustice, and I am sure the opposition will attempt to reduce this history into a morality play. Villains and victims, good and evil, debt and repayment. But history, he says, pausing for effect, is far more complex than that. He lets the words linger. There are nods in the audience. He's good, very good. Jonathan continues, we on the government bench firmly oppose this motion. Not because we deny history, not because we dismiss the suffering of colonized peoples, but because we recognize that reparations are not the path forward. They are impractical, impossible to calculate, and ultimately deeply patronizing. He raises his hand, palm open, like a teacher guiding his students. Who do we pay? Do we cut checks to governments plagued by corruption? Do we hunt down descendants from centuries ago and ask them to hold out their hands? Do we burden today's taxpayers who have never enslaved anyone or colonized a country with the sins of their ancestors? Reparations are a logistical nightmare dressed up as justice. The audience murmurs. He has them thinking. Jonathan leans in, his tone sharpening. And let us not forget, history is not black and white. It is not a simple tale of theft. The British Empire, for all its faults, brought trade, infrastructure, and the rule of law. It gave language, education, and systems of government. To reduce an entire era of history to the word plunder is to flatten its complexity. He gestures toward the opposition. They will tell you of theft. They will tell you of pain. But what of the railways, the ports, the schools and courts? These were not accidents. They were deliberate contributions to global progress. Jonathan's voice softens, almost fatherly. And finally, let us be clear. The best reparations are not checks written for ancient wrongs. The best reparations are the partnerships we build today, the aid we send in times of crisis, the trade agreements that lift all nations. This motion looks backward. We must look forward. For these reasons, we are proud to oppose. He sits down to applause, not thunderous, but solid, enough to give the impression of control. Jonathan glances at Charlotte, his partner. They exchange a subtle smile. To them, it's already won. But across the chamber, Maria Fernandez is rising. She is smaller in stature, her presence quieter at first, but there's a steel in her eyes, a calm fire that Jonathan doesn't see. The Oxford team had laughed at her accent. They had written her off. Now they were about to learn just how costly that laugh would be. Maria takes a breath, looks at the judges, then at the crowd. Her voice cuts through the hall, steady, measured, with the distinct cadence of the Philippines. Not aristocratic, not polished in the Oxford sense, but sharp, clear, and devastating. Mr. Speaker, she begins, her tone even, almost surgical, what the Prime Minister has just delivered is not an argument. It is a deflection. He has told us that our pain is too complicated to measure, our suffering too ancient to address, and our demand for justice too patronizing. She lets the word hang just long enough to sting. Let us be very clear. We are not here to talk about heartstrings. We are here to talk about structural economics. We are here to talk about the systematic, intentional, and ongoing transfer of wealth that created the modern world. The room shifts. People lean forward. Jonathan's smirk flickers. Maria continues, her voice gaining strength. The Prime Minister asked, "Who do we pay?" As if the beneficiaries of colonialism are a mystery. Let's ask a better question. Who profited? Which nations, which corporations, which institutions became fantastically wealthy during the colonial period? The answer is not complicated. It is the very same economies that dominate global trade and finance today. Britain, France, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, these are not ghost nations. They are right here, alive, and still profiting from the structures colonialism built. She raises a piece of paper. Referencing a study, the economist Utsa Patnak has calculated that Britain drained wealth equivalent to an estimated $45 trillion, 0 cents, from India alone during its rule. That is not an emotional appeal. That is not a vague grievance. That is a number. She looks directly at Jonathan. The Prime Minister finds it hard to calculate reparations. Perhaps we can start there. The audience stirs. The judges are scribbling furiously. Jonathan shifts in his seat. Maria moves to his second point, the so-called gifts of empire. Her tone sharpens. He spoke of railways. Let's analyze that gift. Were railways in India built to connect Indian communities? No. They were designed to transport raw cotton and grain from the interior to ports for export, to feed British factories in Manchester and London. Ports were not gifts. They were pipelines for extraction. Schools? Courts? These were not investments in our future. They were mechanisms of control. Her voice cuts deeper. The empire did not develop its colonies. It deliberately underdeveloped them. It dismantled industries that competed with British exports. It created dependency by design. To call this benevolence is not just misleading, it is insulting. The hall is dead quiet. Maria isn't shouting, she doesn't need to. The precision of her words lands heavier than volume ever could. She turns to Jonathan's final flourish, the claim that reparations trap people in victimhood. Her eyes narrow. The Prime Minister says reparations will trap us in victimhood. I find that ironic. What is more patronizing than telling a people that their demand for justice is a psychological weakness? What is more trapping than a global economic system built on stolen resources? A system whose architecture is still in place today. She pauses, then drives the point home. This is not about guilt, it is about debt, an economic debt that is quantifiable, and a moral debt that is undeniable. We are not asking for a handout. We are demanding the return of stolen goods. Maria sits, no applause, just stunned silence. Because in a single speech, she didn't just rebut Jonathan's arguments, she dismantled the worldview behind them. She transformed the debate from a polite exchange of platitudes into a cold, precise reckoning with history. Jonathan's polished rhetoric? Hollow. Maria's accented voice? Unstoppable. The trap had been sprung. Jonathan's smirk is gone. The polished certainty he carried into the chamber has been cracked wide open. But Oxford isn't beaten yet. His partner, Charlotte Ashworth, rises with the determination of someone who has spent her life being told she's destined for greatness. She's tall, striking, with that same clipped Oxford accent sharpened like a blade. Her opening line is meant to sting. The deputy leader of the opposition, she says, with a faint sneer, has given us what I can only describe as a rather dry lecture on economics. Mountains of numbers, cold statistics. But let us remember, people are not numbers. History is not a balance sheet. Her voice rises, more emotional than Jonathan's. She gestures with her hands, her tone more theatrical. What Maria Fernandez gave you was not justice. It was arithmetic. And arithmetic cannot heal wounds. Reparations cannot bring back the lives lost. They cannot erase centuries of pain. What they will do is trap us all in endless cycles of blame and bitterness. There are nods in the audience. It's a clever move. Reframe Maria's precision as coldness, pit fact against feeling. Charlotte presses the advantage. And let us ask, where does this end? Do we demand reparations from Italy for the Roman Empire, from Mongolia for Genghis Khan, from Spain for the Aztecs? History is a tapestry of conquest and conflict. If we reduce it to invoices, then no nation is free from liability. We must choose progress, not vengeance. We must live in the light of the present, not the shadows of the past. Charlotte ends with a flourish. The deputy opposition may want to bury us in statistics, but the truth is simple. Reparations are not justice. They are an impossible attempt to rewrite history, and we will not build a better future by endlessly relitigating the past. She sits, confident, convinced she has wrestled control back. But then Paulo Santo stands. Unlike Maria, Paulo's presence is quieter. He doesn't rise with force, he doesn't project arrogance. He steps forward like a teacher about to give a lecture. Calm, thoughtful, deliberate. He waits until the room has stilled, then begins softly. "Mr. Speaker," he says, his voice measured, "the Deputy Prime Minister worries we've lost the human element. I assure you, we have not." He lets the words settle. He asked where this ends. That is an excellent question. And the answer is simple. It ends where the legacy of that specific injustice ends. The Roman Empire does not shape Italy's modern economy. The Mongol conquest did not build the framework of today's global markets. But the wealth extracted by European colonialism, that wealth is the foundation of our modern world. The trade routes, the financial institutions, the corporations, the nations that still dominate today, all of them sit atop that legacy. Paulo's voice is calm, but it carries weight. He's not fiery like Maria. He's surgical, philosophical. He turns toward Jonathan and Charlotte. "You see, the problem with your case is that you treat colonialism as if it were a chapter in a history book, finished, closed, past. But we don't experience it as the past. We experience it as the architecture of the very room we are sitting in. The rules of global trade, the wealth gaps between nations, the stereotypes you carry about our voices. This is not history. It is present reality." The hall is utterly silent. Even the judges are frozen, pens paused. Paulo continues, weaving philosophy into plain truth. "The Deputy Prime Minister says reparations reduce people to numbers, but what is more dehumanizing? To acknowledge the scale of theft in clear figures, or to reduce that theft to sentimental metaphors about moving on? Numbers do not strip humanity. They reveal the scale of its violation." He raises his hand slightly, his voice firming. "And let us address the word victimhood. The government tells us reparations will trap us as victims. But what is more trapping than a global system where wealth flows one way, from south to north, while the south is told to simply move on? What is more trapping than hearing your own accent mocked as inferior, your own history reframed as charity?" The Oxford team shifts uncomfortably. Paulo presses harder. "The truth, Mr. Speaker, is that reparations are not about guilt. They are not about endless blame. They are about truth. They are about the act of acknowledgement. And yes, they are about repayment. Not because money solves everything, but because stolen goods must be returned. That is not vengeance. That is justice." He pauses, letting silence do the work. Then, with quiet force, he delivers the line that turns the room. "The greatest theft of colonialism was not gold, it was not spices, it was not even the trillions of dollars drained from our economies. The greatest theft was identity. Colonialism stole the right of nations to define themselves. It told us that one accent was superior, that one culture was civilized, and all others inferior. And that prejudice is alive in this very room tonight." There's a ripple through the audience. The words hang like thunder. Paulo looks directly at Jonathan and Charlotte. The Prime Minister spoke of partnership, but there can be no partnership without equality. And there can be no equality while one partner still lives in the house the other built, with stolen materials, while being told to be grateful for the roof over their head. He sits down, no theatrics, just quiet conviction. The room is stunned. Charlotte's passionate speech has evaporated in the face of Paulo's calm dismantling. He didn't shout, he didn't grandstand, he simply reframed the debate into something Oxford could no longer touch. Jonathan stares at his notes, his jaw tight. Charlotte looks down, avoiding eye contact. The power has shifted. Because Maria and Paulo haven't just countered Oxford's case, they've dismantled the very lens through which Oxford saw the world. The debate isn't about whether reparations are practical, it's about whether colonialism is still alive in the present, in economics, in prejudice, in voices. And Oxford has no answer for that. The chamber is still, the silence is thick, almost suffocating. Jonathan and Charlotte, the Oxford favorites, sit stiff in their seats. The composure that carried them into the hall is gone. Their polished certainty has been replaced by pale faces and restless hands. Maria and Paulo, by contrast, sit calm but exhausted. They don't celebrate, they don't smile. They've given everything, not just arguments, but pieces of themselves. They know this wasn't just about winning a debate. It was about proving their right to be heard. The judges file out to deliberate. The room hums with tension. Whispers ripple through the audience. Students exchanging shocked glances. Professors murmuring about the sheer precision of Maria's economics and the philosophical depth of Paulo's speech. 15 minutes feel like an hour. Then the judges return. The head adjudicator, a stern woman from Australia, steps to the front. She holds her notes like a verdict waiting to be read. She begins neutrally. This was an extraordinary debate. Both teams demonstrated skill, eloquence, and passion. She outlines Oxford's case first. The government team presented a classic and polished defense of the status quo. It was elegant in form, but as the debate progressed, it became increasingly clear that its substance was shallow. Jonathan and Charlotte stare at the floor. The adjudicator turns to Maria and Paulo. Her voice shifts, respect woven into every word. The opposition team did something remarkable tonight. They refused to debate on the superficial terms laid before them. Instead, they reframed the clash at its core. She looks at Maria. The deputy leader's speech was one of the most devastatingly effective economic demolitions I have ever witnessed in this championship. She turned vague arguments of impracticality into quantifiable theft. She did not just rebut, she redefined the entire question. And then she turns to Paulo. The member for the opposition elevated this debate to another level. He connected colonial reparations not only to economics, but to philosophy, identity, and the lived experience of prejudice in this very room. His speech was as brave as it was brilliant. He reminded us all that the weight of an argument is not carried in the accent it is spoken with, but in the truth it contains. The chamber is frozen. Everyone waits. For these reasons, the adjudicator concludes it is the unanimous decision of this panel to award the debate to the team from the Philippines. For a heartbeat, there is silence. Then the room erupts, not in polite applause, but in a wave of genuine, heartfelt ovation. Students leap to their feet. Professors clap with unrestrained admiration. The roar fills the hall, echoing off the centuries-old walls. Maria and Paulo look at each other. The composure they've held breaks. Tears stream down their faces as they embrace. It's not just victory, it's vindication. Across the room, Jonathan and Charlotte sit motionless. Their humiliation is complete. They mocked their opponent's accents, only to be dismantled in front of the entire chamber. They weren't just beaten, they were outclassed publicly, decisively, and irreversibly. The story spreads like wildfire through the tournament. Students whisper about it in corridors, social media buzzes. The narrative is irresistible. The arrogant favorites undone by the brilliance of underdogs they dismissed. For Jonathan and Charlotte, it's more than a loss, it's a reckoning. Their polished accents and flawless delivery had been weapons their whole lives. Now, for the first time, they realized those weapons were useless against truth backed by substance. Later, Jonathan reportedly approached Paulo quietly. No grand apology, just a humbled question. What were those books you referenced? I'd like to read them. It wasn't redemption, but it was a crack in the wall of arrogance, a moment of growth forced by humiliation. For Maria and Paulo, the victory became legend, a masterclass in how to dismantle prejudice argument by argument, a beacon for every debater, scholar, nurse, engineer, or worker who has ever been made to feel small because of how their English sounds. Because that's what this debate was really about. Not just emotion on reparations, not just a trophy, but the fight against a prejudice that silences voices across the world every single day. The Filipino accent, mocked, belittled, dismissed, is not a weakness. It is a map of history, a badge of endurance, a declaration of identity. It is the sound of a people who survived colonization, adapted, and turned the colonizers' language into their own tool for excellence. Think about it. Filipino nurses in American hospitals saving lives while patients question their expertise because of an accent. Engineers in Middle Eastern boardrooms forced to work twice as hard to prove they belong. Call center workers laughed at for their voices even as they carry billion-dollar industries on their backs. Scholars dismissed in classrooms until they crush opponents with brilliance, just like Maria and Paulo did. This isn't fiction, this is daily life. And what Maria and Paulo proved on one of the most elite stages in the world is that substance will always crush style, that truth will always outweigh prejudice, that brilliance cannot be silenced by the sound it arrives in. So let me ask you directly, have you ever felt underestimated because of your accent? Have you ever been forced to fight twice as hard to prove your worth? Share your story in the comments. Let this space become a celebration of every voice, every rhythm, every history carried in the sound of our words. And if you believe, truly believe, that substance matters more than style, that the Filipino accent is not baggage but brilliance, smash that like button and type voice in the comments. Let's show the world that no amount of mockery can erase identity. Because the story of Maria and Paulo is more than a debate. It is a metaphor for something far larger, a struggle fought in classrooms, hospitals, boardrooms, and parliaments around the world. It is a reminder that prejudice is real, but so is power. That underestimation is dangerous, not for the underestimated, but for the arrogant who fail to see what's in front of them. And maybe that's the ultimate irony. Jonathan and Charlotte thought the debate was theirs the moment they heard Maria and Paulo speak. In reality, the debate was lost for them in that exact moment. Because when you mistake an accent for weakness, you've already proven you don't understand strength. The Filipino voice, the Filipino accent, is not an echo of empire. It is a defiance of it. It is the sound of resilience, of intellect, of identity carried across generations. It is proof that language may begin in the house of the colonizer, but it will always be rebuilt in the voice of the survivor. And that, more than any trophy, is the real victory.